brace yourself.
We haven't done an official tally, but my wife said it's probably over 30,000 right now.
Seems like a lot for a 9-year-old's piggy bank, huh? Well, all that money's going somewhere else.
My friend Xander said that we should make some bracelets. And then I told my mom my idea. And then she said that the money should go to the people of Minneapolis.
The money from Cameron's bracelets helping families in hurting neighborhoods of the Twin Cities. And that money coming in quickly. Cameron's dad, Ron Johnson, a former NFL player, drafting a few buddies to help out.
Spice Adams plays for the Bears, huge social media platform. Chad Greenway, former Viking. It just kind of spiderwebbed.
But of course, all of this is about more than just bracelets.
George Floyd looks like me. You know, I'm 6'3", 225 pounds. The fact that it just gives me a chance to give back and do some things, I think that's what's been the best. A lot of white people don't really know what to do. You know, they don't know how to support. I think when people started to see, okay, this is an opportunity for me to help, but then also, and I had to have a conversation.
Cameron taking the time for those conversations.
Every time a customer comes, I always tell them why we're doing this. So people know.
So what's next for the booming bracelet biz? Can I place an order all the way from New York City?
Yeah.
You want to take his colors down? What colors does he want?
What colors do you want?
Put me down for blue and green, please, Cameron. For anyone else who'd like to help, check out the family's GoFundMe page titled Cameron and Friends Bracelets for Unity and Justice. Mona, Kenneth?
Thank you, Will. A lot of Camerons out there making a difference.
Definitely. I'm putting myself down for blue and yellow.
There it is, and
Or
that's what's
black and
making
yellow, black and
news
yellow.
in America this morning. Right now on America This Morning, protesters clashing with police on the 10th night of unrest after the death of George Floyd. 2 officers suspended for pushing down this 75-year-old man. Arrest in Atlanta and New York. And new details emerging about the former officers charged in Floyd's death. For the first time, we hear from the man with Floyd just before that deadly encounter.
Trump fights back how the president is taking aim at the Republican senator who sided with former Defense Secretary James Mattis and his harsh rebuke of the White House.
America's job crisis. The unemployment report due out today. Is this the peak of the crisis? The Americans getting hurt the most, and the best places to find a job right now.
Wild weather, lightning strikes across the Northeast. 2 military personnel are injured, plus tropical depression Cristobal. The state of emergency already declared.
New details on this massive landslide. Several homes destroyed. This morning, the dog that made it out alive.
And the new normal, the Six Flags amusement park reopening today. The changes being made.
From ABC News in New York, this is America This Morning.
Good Friday morning, everyone. As we prepare for another weekend of protests across this country, there's growing hope that the death of George Floyd will lead to substantial and meaningful change.
A new poll out this morning finds 74% of Americans view Floyd's death as part of an underlying racial injustice problem as opposed to an isolated incident.
Most of the protests in recent hours have been peaceful, but this moment in Buffalo is drawing backlash this morning. Police seen pushing down a 75-year-old man. The mayor and the governor of New York are speaking out this morning.
The protests are taking a back seat to honoring George Floyd himself after powerful words from the Reverend Al Sharpton calling for white America to get your knee off our necks.
But our coverage begins with ABC's Megan Tevrizian and the overnight developments.
Overnight, defiant protesters facing off with police.
In Atlanta, officers in riot gear marching towards Centennial Park after protesters broke the 9 p.m. curfew. In New York, the NYPD detaining protesters at Washington Square Park. In this video from Buffalo showing what appears to be 2 police officers pushing a 75-year-old man to the ground, blood coming from his ear. Police saying the man fell. That man hospitalized this morning. Governor Andrew Cuomo reacting, saying the incident is wholly unjustified and utterly disgraceful. Police officers must enforce, not abuse the law. The protests from coast to coast, mostly peaceful. Crowds marching in Chicago, including Kanye West. West now setting up a college fund for George Floyd's daughter and aiding black-owned businesses from his hometown. It comes as we learn more about the former officers charged in Floyd's death. Attorneys for 3 of the officers are shifting the blame to 19-year veteran Derek Chauvin, seen with his knee on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. Those officers, Toe Tao, Alexander King, and Thomas Lane, each face 2 charges, including aiding and abetting second-degree murder. King was only on his 3rd shift as a full-time officer. His attorney says King told the officer, "You shouldn't do this." Lane's lawyer says it was only Lane's 4th day on the job and says Lane asked Chauvin twice, should we roll him over? Also this morning, new details emerging about Chauvin's past. A complaint from 2007 says he was disciplined after a woman accused him and another officer of pulling her over, frisking her, and pulling her out of her car for driving 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. This morning, Maurice Lester Hall, Floyd's friend and one of the people seen in that video just before Floyd's deadly encounter, says Floyd was not resisting police. And he says he'll always remember the fear in Floyd's face.
The officer started George, first of all, by bluntly banging on the window. Once he done that, then I can see Mr. George putting his hands above the steering wheel of the vehicle. And once he did that, then I witnessed the officer reaching in and grabbing Mr. Floyd's hands.
Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, after days of protests, a celebration of Floyd's life. The city's police chief taking a knee as the body of George Floyd passed by in the hearse. The Reverend Al Sharpton delivering the eulogy, punctuated by a powerful moment of silence, 8 minutes and 46 seconds for the time Floyd had the officer's knee on his neck.
What happened to Floyd happens every day in this country, in education, in health services. It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knee off our necks.
Reverend Al Sharpton has announced there will be a March on Washington August 28th, led by family members of Black people killed by police, marking the 57th anniversary of the original March on Washington. Kenneth, Mona.
Megan, thank you. And we are learning disturbing new details about the final moments of Ahmaud Arbery's life before he was shot and killed back in February in Georgia. During a hearing Thursday, an investigator testified that suspect Travis McMichael shot Arbery, then used the N-word as he stood over his body. He also said all 3 suspects, quote, chased, hunted down, and executed Arbery for no apparent reason. The judge ruled the case against the 3 suspects can go forward.
We turn now to the economy, and the new jobs report due out this morning is expected to show that the unemployment rate has reached a level we haven't seen since the Great Depression. Here's ABC's Inez de la Catera.
This morning, the economic toll of the coronavirus pandemic coming into focus, with 43 million American workers filing for unemployment benefits since March. The monthly jobs report today is expected to show figures we haven't seen since the 1930s. Experts predicting a jobless rate of nearly 20%, with another 8 million jobs lost in May. The big question, how many of those jobs will be lost for good?
I went from working 70 hours to nothing.
Nneka Ejeyoma of Chattanooga lost her bartending job in March. Her bar has since reopened, but has only rehired a fraction of the staff. She gets $275 in state unemployment benefits each week, plus $600 a week in federal benefits, but they expire at the end of next month.
If it was just $275 that I was getting a week, with the stimulus, which ends in July, which is kind of scary for a lot of people, that made it to a livable wage.
One recent survey found 78% of people who recently lost their jobs believe their layoffs will be temporary. That's the hope of Donald Franklin in Alakepa, Pennsylvania. He works in manufacturing.
I asked my boss yesterday when the night shift crew going to come back in, and he said the orders are still light. So I'm not really sure when I'm going to go back to work.
But for many in the retail sector, the job losses are permanent. JCPenney, which recently filed for bankruptcy, announced Thursday that 154 stores will close this summer. In hard-hit Las Vegas, where the unemployment rate has topped 30%, new hope this morning with casinos back open. The famous Bellagio fountains once again flowing. But the looming question, despite the temperature checks and plexiglass barriers for social distancing, will the crowds come back? The locals are betting on it.
We are so happy that Vegas is reopening. We had so much fun. I love this city.
As for the industries that are hiring, experts say IT and healthcare are pretty solid right now, and there is a glimmer of hope for the travel industry. Airlines are now starting to add flights for the summer, the first step in what will likely be a very long recovery. Kenneth and Mona.
Inez, thank you. As more areas of the country reopen, we're seeing a spike in new coronavirus infections. Utah was one of the first states to begin reopening last month. It now has about 10,000 cases. That's double the number reported when reopening started. And Arizona reported nearly 1,000 new cases on Wednesday, about 2 weeks after lockdowns ended there. Experts say the increase in cases might be linked to recent holidays, which brought people together.
All it takes is one infected person among a large gathering without the proper precautions to see these spikes. And holidays, as you mentioned, Mother's Day, Memorial Day, do lean towards larger groups of individuals coming together, both indoors and outdoors.
And now there's new concern that the nationwide protests will lead to even more spikes. City officials in Los Angeles are urging protesters to self-quarantine for 14 days.
Time now for a look at your Friday morning weather. A light show in the skies over the nation's capital. Lightning struck the Washington Monument, and 2 National Guardsmen were seriously injured during a lightning strike near the White House. Meanwhile, Louisiana's governor has now declared a state of emergency ahead of Tropical Depression Cristobal, which is expected to arrive Sunday. The storm is blamed for 6 deaths in Mexico. Looking at today's high temperatures, 80s and 90s in the Northeast, 90s in the Rockies, and cool on the West Coast as we head into the weekend. Coming up, a judge decides whether Bernie Madoff should be released from prison.
But first, President Trump fires back overnight his message to the Republican senator who criticized his response to protests near the White House.
And later, new information about this massive landslide and the dog that survived it.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here.